Marc Thiessen, American Enterprise Institute scholar, and Marie Hart, former State Department spokesperson. Both are Fox News contributors. Welcome to both of you.
Good to be with you,
Marie, your reaction to that argument by the White House counsel?
Well, the founders very specifically wrote impeachment into the Constitution to give Congress a way to hold the president accountable between elections. So they wrote it in there to be used. The question of whether what he did is impeachable is the question before the Senate right now. But what Democrats would also say is what President Trump is being accused of, trying to use his official position to get political dirt for 2020, is actually the interfering in the 2020 election here. And that's the argument, that he was trying to sway that election by using aid to get political dirt, and that in fact is abuse of power. So Democrats are actually making that argument.
Well, that's the argument that has been made, and now you hear the White House saying that they believe that the egregious behavior is trying to rob people of the next election, which is now like 9 months away. We're days away from Iowa. This process is pretty much underway at this point. He argues, let the people decide.
Well, first of all, to Marie's point, he didn't actually withhold the aid, so that it didn't happen. Number two, this is the first presidential impeachment in American history that doesn't have any statutory crimes alleged and is happening during presidential election year. Of course, this is an effort to take this decision away from the voters, because Adam Schiff said so. He said, quote, "The president's misconduct cannot be decided at the ballot box. You can't be assured the election will be fairly won." That's absurd. Do you remember in 2016, the absolute people set their hair on fire when Donald Trump questioned whether the election would be fair? He just did it in an impeachment trial. We can't trust the American people to make this decision because they could be taken in by Donald Trump. Maybe what they're being taken in by is historically low unemployment, booming economy, and all those other things that the Democrats really don't think they can win.
It's interesting because the argument from the president really has been that what they wanted to find out about was 2016. And you can argue about whether or not there's any legitimate reason to think that the Ukrainians had anything going on in terms of election meddling in 2016, but that it wasn't about 2020, that it was about 2016, the server, all that stuff. And people say, that's a wacky theory. It wasn't true. But when you look at all the references, they appear to go backwards instead of forwards. That being said, I want to play this from Zoe Lofgren on the issue of, this is from the Sunday shows, on the issue of whether or not the House managers completed their task. Watch this.
Ultimately,
withdrew the cases and
we
went to the
realized
Senate.
we had the evidence we were going to get and that it was sufficient to prove our case. If we had waited for 3 or 4 years, the election would be over. The issue would be almost moot.
So that's the we had to move on argument for time, and we got what we were going to get. And then you have but now we have to hear from witnesses on the Senate side argument, Mark.
Well, I mean, this is what's so absurd about the whole Bolton situation, is that they didn't want to wait for the courts. Nancy Pelosi actually said we can't be bound by the courts. Well, they thought it would take too long. Well, what would it take too long? Well, this might go to the voters, and they might make a decision based on the evidence. Barack Obama, everyone's touting the GAO report, and you pointed out that Barack Obama was found to have done something illegal by the GAO. He also defied a subpoena and refused to provide documents in the Fast and Furious case. And Adam Schiff actually said that he had the right to invoke executive privilege in that case because there's a long precedent of presidents having confidential conversations with their advisors. And Barack Obama did run out the clock. So they're afraid that Trump will end up doing what Barack Obama did by going to the courts.
Yeah, I mean, one of the differences is, and Marie, you can jump in on this, is that John Bolton said, after the fact, after the House investigation, that he wants to talk. And there was so much pushback on, all of these people are hearsay. This is, she heard it from him and he heard it from that one, and nobody really talked to the president. Now you've got someone, John Bolton, who says, yeah, I talked to the president. I was in the room, as his book title is.
Exactly. And who has a book where he outlines firsthand information that he's going to make money off of. And since the House investigation, you're right, he has said he wants to talk. I don't think the American people are going to buy the argument that you may not have liked the House process. And look, some Democrats believe they should have subpoenaed Bolton and others, right? There are Democrats who believe that. But the American people, when they're put in front of themselves with the argument that the House didn't subpoena them, maybe they should have, but because they didn't, suddenly we're not entitled to all of the information when someone in the room wants to talk. That is a very hard argument, right? And so when you hear people like Mitt Romney, when you hear Susan Collins, and they say, sure, they didn't like the House process. They don't think it was fair. I happen to think it was, but some Republicans don't. But how can you say now we're going to give up our chance to actually hear from in the room?
They also say it should be a 1-for-1, which I think is an almost insurmountable task. I can't imagine how you're going to find two equivalent witnesses who show up and who actually talk, the whistleblower, Hunter Biden, John Bolton. I just think that it's going to be so intractable that Republicans, many of them will decide that they don't want to go down that road. So we'll see.
That's right.
Marie, thank you. Mark, thank you. Good to see you both. So I want to bring this to your attention. Moments ago,